started just doing a day here. Are you recording?
I'm recording, if that's okay.
Yeah, go ahead.
Hey everyone, welcome to the second episode of the Key in the Lake podcast. This is Jake Hookie. I will be solo this evening. My co-host and good friend Wilson Torres is unable to join me this week as I took a little trip over to Journeyman Distillery over in Three Oaks, Michigan. Actually just left this morning around 8 a.m. This is on Monday, February 25th, and I spent the day hanging out with my good friend Matthew McClain. He is a distiller over at Journeyman. Him and I worked together for a number of years over at Koval Distillery, and I was heading out that way to write an article for another publication, and I thought, hey, why not grab the microphone, set it all up, and have a little conversation with Matt. It turned out to be pretty good. Got the nice little ambiance distillery in the background. If you've ever been out to Three Oaks to visit Journeyman, which you should if you're ever in the Chicagoland area or out in Michigan, they have a beautiful facility out there where they distill. Have a couple different bars, restaurant, and a huge private event center, and everything is connected into one old warehouse. And on the top floor is a event space where the stills of the actual towers of the still come up through the floor. So basically, you can see into the operation from wherever you're visiting the distillery, which is a really cool aspect and really great for anybody who's interested in the distilling world and see the whole process actually take place live to view it. So it was a great little afternoon out there, or I should say morning. Matt showed me around along with one of the other distillers, Tom. We had some really great conversations, took a few photos, tried a little whiskey, and at the end, like I said, we recorded this conversation. Basically, what I wanted to do was just talk to Matt about how he got into the whiskey world, our little bit of our time spent together at Koval, and what he plans on doing with Journeyman in the future. Matt, which he'll talk about and let him talk about it mostly himself, and instead of hearing me ramble on about it, the best thing that seems to be happening for Matt over at Journeyman is that he gets to experiment with so many different possibilities when it comes to whiskeys, not just American styles, but taking bits and pieces of old world parts of the distilling world and applying them to American whiskey. They are doing some really great stuff over there at Journeyman. They're kind of one of the founding fathers, if you will, when it comes to this whole craft movement here in the Midwest. And I wanted to talk to him about where they plan on going, what the future is for them, what the future is for Matt as well, because he's a super hardworking dude. When I worked with him over at Koval, he was commuting about an hour and a half each way. He actually lived over in northwest Indiana. If you aren't familiar with this area, northwest Indiana kind of merges with Michigan, and Chicago is just around the bend over on Lake Michigan, so it's kind of a little bit of a tri-state area. And he would commute every day in and out about an hour and a half each way, like I said, and provide for his little family as well, and just basically be a part of this awesome world and craft spirits. He had the opportunity to stay a little bit closer to home a few years ago and start working for Journeyman, which is only probably about a 15-20 minute ride for him. So it was a little bit easier on him, probably a little bit easier on his family too, than now that he has two kids. So I'm sure they love spending a little more time with him, seeing a little more often. I know he doesn't miss the commute, as he mentions at the very end of the podcast, but that's about it. All I have to say. This was a really great conversation. Wilson will be back with me for the next episode. We will be recording live from the Beguile Brewing on the next one for the third iteration of the Key in the Lake podcast. Until then, everybody enjoy your week. Enjoy your time spent with one another. And cheers. And oh yeah, I'm drinking a little bit of Eagle Rare this evening on a nice little cold evening here in Chicago. The bourbon kind of tends to warm you up, so I went with a little bit of a classic there and had some Eagle Rare while I record this intro. Other than that, guys, take it easy.
How's it going?
Doing great. Obviously, all right, so we're over at Journeyman Distillery here with Matt McClain, and we are going to start talking about how we know each other, where we got into the whiskey industry, and what he's doing over here at Journeyman, if that's okay with you.
Sounds great.
Awesome. So,
fire away.
Yeah, Matt and I actually worked together at Koval a number of years ago, and he came over to Journeyman almost 3 years ago, and What's been the biggest change since then?
Well, obviously the move back to kind of where I'm from. I grew up in Northwest Indiana, so Southwest Michigan is almost like Northwest Indiana. It's only a few minutes across the border from Indiana. So it's basically kind of like moving home almost. Sorry about the barrels being filled in the distillery.
Put those bungs in.
Yeah. Well, the biggest change is I've moved into more of a creative role at this distillery. So definitely have a bigger chance here to expand on my own ideas, but also operating within the distillery here and our core values, I guess. Sorry, guys. Lots of stuff going on.
Lots of stuff going on. We are recording just above the actual still, so on the upper level of the facility in one of the event spaces. But you have that. Don't worry about it. Well, we love the whole natural sound, the actual real noises of distilling, which is walkie-talkies.
Walkie-talkies and hammering bungs.
Hammering bungs, which is a true story, for sure. Well, what brought you mostly into the whiskey world? I know you were doing brewing before, but what kind of brought you into it?
The funny story about that is actually Journeyman's Whiskey is actually what got me interested in craft distilling. So I was working at Greenbush Brewing Company in Sawyer, Michigan. I worked there for a couple years, but I was also living in Three Oaks while I was doing that, and this is where Journeyman was. Journeyman's Whiskey is actually the first craft whiskey that I tried, and I was blown away because at the time I thought whiskey had to taste like Jack Daniels or it had to taste like Jim Beam. I kind of associated whiskey with those particular tastes. So it kind of blew my mind when I tasted actually the Last Feather Rye here. At the time it was called Ravenswood Rye. But it was so sweet and so smooth and so delicate. And that's actually really what got me started in my interest in whiskey. So the next step for me as someone who was in the beer industry was to actually maybe start investigating the whiskey scene. To me, there was always some sort of mystic behind distilling because it wasn't as well known. The production of it wasn't as well known as what most people think of when they think of brewing beer. It seems very straightforward.
Yep.
I always thought there was kind of a mystic quality behind the magic of how the spirit is produced. And I always kind of viewed it romantically, if you would say that, as the completion of it's the cycle of alcohol production. So you make this beer, and then the other part of that is reclaiming it into this concentrated spirit form. And I always thought that was a really romantic idea. So that's kind of what drew me into the industry.
Yeah, I think it's funny how people always assume that the folks that work in the whiskey industry always have these extensive palates before entering, but we all kind of always all have the same Jack, Jameson, and
it definitely. I remember one. I didn't really even know exactly what a whiskey still looked like.
Definitely.
I remember getting to Koval for my first time and seeing all the valves and all the dials and all the copper and all the piping, and thinking, even though I had seen, worked with beer kettles and mash tuns, I remember feeling slightly over my head. I was like, there's no way I'm going to know what all this stuff does. But I mean, now it's like second nature. But palate-wise, I remember the first day of being trained there, and one of the distillers at the time, Nick, was trying to show me the difference between heads and hearts, which is different cuts, and I looked bewildered because I was like, I don't taste a difference at all. Yeah. And I remember him saying, "Don't worry, man, you will." And I remember just being dumbfounded, because I had zero palate. And it took me probably about a year to make my own comfortable head's cut into a heart's cut, with feeling confident about that. So I think it's definitely a palate that needs to be developed. Especially, I think it's a very delicate palate that needs to be developed in whiskey production.
I think it's kind of where you're talking about the romantic side of it all. Once you really figure out that there's so much of a hard process that goes into it, the whole week of producing it, and then the barrel aging aspect of it as well, which probably is like the most, which everybody talks about, like the most magical, kind of where everything happens to the flavors and the taste of the whiskey, and kind of where that romantic charm comes into it. Whereas, I used to pass around the heads, the hearts, and the tails cuts at tours at Cobalt. And some people would even smell the difference. Be like, oh, okay. And then I'm like, oh yeah, they are around this every single day. You really have to show them, explain to them what's inside of those chemical compounds versus if you actually did taste it, we didn't allow to taste it, except for the very few that just had my back turned and they started drinking out of the head's bottle. But a lot goes into it, because like the head cut is the very first part of the. If you want to go into it and explain it. Sure,
and it's interesting. You would think that something that you didn't want in your final spirit would smell and taste horrible, but heads actually have a relatively delightful smell to them, which is interesting. Actually, the term blind drunk actually comes from Packwood's appellation. Distillers not taking their head cuts off of their distillates. And your heads actually has methanol, like methyl alcohol in it, aldehydes, acetone. It's basically nail polish remover. So they were actually drinking this stuff, and it doesn't have a terrible taste to it or a terrible smell to it. It's strong, sure, but they were actually drinking themselves blind. But, I mean, that's a very small part. When your distillation starts coming off your still, it's a very small part of the distillation as a whole. But it's something that does need to be taken out of the whole thing before you get into your heart cut, which is the purest form of your distillate, the more ethanol-rich grain drinking alcohol. But it goes back into that's kind of an not only is it a scientific thing, but it's also an artistic thing on the distiller's part of where he needs to make that cut. And the same thing with the tails cut. The tails is the last part of the distillation that comes off. So you get your heavier alcohols pushing through. You get fusel oils coming through, which a lot of those lend a lot of flavor into your heart cut. So it's really the overall spirit that you're looking for. Because distillery depends on where how much the interactions of the barrels and all that to get you certain flavors. How long they're going to be aging the product, and what characteristics they want in their whiskey. So, I mean, from distillery to distillery, I mean that tails cut definitely varies. There's no scientific point for tails where it's like, all right, this is where it needs to end.
Yeah, because you could show somebody who's a novice to any of it, never had it before, you could give them a heart cut and tail cut. They're like, oh, maybe because they're telling me it's different.
Sure,
maybe
right.
They play a trick on your head that maybe it's a little bit different in flavor or smell, and the aroma definitely can be different.
And you can definitely feel it. Viscosity, the oiliness of the spirit. I always do this burnt popcorn kind of test when you're smelling where the alcohol's coming off your still off of a whiskey parrot, as we call it. It gets kind of a burnt popcorn smell. It's hard to describe, but that's generally when you're like taking a turn for the end of your distillation. Also, tails sometimes kind of smell like a wet dog.
Yeah, truly does.
I'm sure you've smelled your fair share of tails, but
it's also just gave my dog a bath last week. She hates getting baths. It's like World War III. So.
My dog hates also taking baths as well. She runs from the hose and stuff.
Yeah, we have to do it inside of our bathtub because in an apartment that's basically
right.
blends us too, and she tears down the shower curtain every time and breaks a few things. And then she likes to shake it all out in the middle of the bathroom so that your bathroom's just soaked.
I remember, small quarters living in Chicago with a large animal.
Yeah, maybe you're the smart one that got out of it, moved out here to.
And now I pay the same price for a 3-bedroom house and a backyard.
Sure, yeah. And now you can come to work and have a golf course too.
Oh yeah,
a mini golf course. No, that's awesome. Where do you think, for yourself, like how you've grown in the last? I mean, it's been 3 years. You've been working in this industry for what, 6-7 years now?
In the whiskey industry, 6 years. I've been in beer. So beverage, beer and spirit about 8 years probably now. So I've been making some sort of craft booze for the last 8 years now. What was the question?
Where do you see yourself expanding into it? Like, how have you changed? What do you think is where your strengths are now?
It's definitely since coming here. I think I talked about a little bit. My creative, artistic approach to spirits has grown exponentially since I've gotten here, and I think a lot of that has to do with encouragement in trying different things and straying from the norm. Definitely viewing that there's not one way to make a spirit, and there's not one way to distill. I think since this move to Journeyman, my creative side has been sparked, and I think it'll continue to grow. And I hope it does.
Yeah, I think it has. I mean, if we can talk about the sherry cask downstairs, it has a lot to do, I think, with the availability to always try new things.
Sure, and take cues from other successful places when needed.
The whiskey industry.
Sure. So Bill, myself, and a handful of the distillers went to Scotland a few years back, and we toured the countryside. I went to a bunch of different Scotch distilleries there, and one of our favorites was Glenfarclas and Speyside. And they had a very heavy sherry influence in their Scotch. It was all aged in ex-sherry butts. And we got back and we were like, it was some of the most beautiful spirit I'd ever drank. And we're like, well, we have to do something like that, but with an American flair to it.
Absolutely,
so we took rye that we grew on Bill's family farm in central Indiana. And rye is a very traditional American crop, and a whiskey grain. So we took that, sent it to a company, and had them malt it, like you would find in malted barleys and scotches and stuff like that. And that malting process lends a very unique flavor to it. And then we distilled it. Kind of like Scotch, a lot of big full flavor, about 140, 150 proof. We put it in ex-sherry cask, where Jake just saw it down there and got to sample some of it.
Definitely. Really good taste.
And it's only about a year and a half old right now, and we hope to let it sit for about 10 years. That's the plan right now. And then hopefully it creates a very sought-after estate whiskey.
Definitely. I mean, I had the similar approach with Journeyman back in the day too, probably about the same amount of time almost. Is that it was one of the very first craft spirits I ever had too, and I came from a part of Iowa where Templeton rye was always kind of like the king, and this is when Templeton rye had just expanded nationally and kind of became first into Chicago, it seemed like. And so when I saw 100% rye, like a rye whiskey, you're like, oh, I want to try that, and then you try the smoothness of it, and then you really get to know kind of the approach of the distillery once you're inside of this industry for long enough, and always the experimentation, but always owning yourself to the historical parts of where is it coming from, what American traditions can add value to an old world spirit like Scotch, where it's so much more longevity to it. But in distillers, when they first kind of came over, or people just in general started coming over to America, and distilling was a part of that process. It was using those old world approaches and using the rye grains, and it wasn't the expansion of corn until people started expanding more west. Sure. And it's kind of cool to see how this distillery here honors that, and you have those casks now downstairs, and doing still kind of a traditional American takes with your own little twist on it.
Sure.
It's a very unique thing to see. Anything in the future you guys are working with that you're excited about?
Tom and I talked about it a little bit, but the triticale red corn bourbon that we're going to be working on.
Because red corn can lend itself to different flavors, which you guys were talking about.
Yeah, we've played with some red corn bourbons, and it lends a beautiful caramel flavor to it. And we actually grew some triticale on the family farm, which is actually a rye wheat hybrid. And we're going to make starting next week, we're going to make a red corn bourbon, like almost a 51% red corn, 49% triticale bourbon, which will actually be malted triticale.
Nice.
So in the future, I'm looking forward personally towards that.
Yeah.
Because actually, I have no idea what it's going to be like. So it's completely new territory.
Is that what kind of most like brought you here? Is all of that the new territory of it all kind of?
Yeah. I mean,
testing new things out. Obviously, being closer to home helps out instead of beating an hour and a half each day, each way.
Yeah. No, I mean, just the opportunities here are really attractive.
Yeah.
Getting to a chance to create my own creations within the company, and the experimental side of it. I think those are like the main things that I get out of this relationship with Journeyman.
Yeah, and that's kind of what you hear a lot of people in whiskey and beer, whatever it might be, is that the best part of it is that you try to do things on your own and do all this new stuff.
Right.
That's
there's no what I love about this making whiskey here. There's no end in sight. There's no end game.
Yeah.
It's ever evolving. There's literally always new projects. There's always new visions. So it's never the same thing every day. And I think that's important in this business, is to always keep evolving and keep creating new things for people to try. And for yourself to try.
Yeah, definitely. That kind of is one thing too. It's like when you see those new spirits out there on the shelf, it can be very overwhelming. But buying a bottle, going out there, investing a little bit of money into a bottle maybe you haven't tried, or maybe you have just a sample of, it's definitely worth to go out there and see if you like it, because it can open up your palate to so many more different distilleries.
Yeah, absolutely.
Is there something like you like to go after and try new things personally? I'm one of those guys that probably tries a new. I don't have one brand. Yeah.
Of whiskey, but
you don't just exclusively drink Journeyman. Is that what you're saying?
No, I don't. I mean, I drink a lot of Journeyman, but I also don't go to the store and be like, oh, my bourbon is Maker's 46. Definitely. And that's all I get ever. Generally I look for places that I haven't heard of, to be honest, because working for a craft distillery, obviously people like me who's going to give this name a shot is what keeps us in business and what's let us grow. So being a craft distiller, I definitely look for small places to give a shot. And I mean, a lot of times those are winners. Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think what attracted me to beer first was like you. I started doing work in breweries and then transitioned over to distilleries. Was that the community there what it was really built on and founded on is that we can succeed together. And absolutely.
You see that not just in your local regions but kind of across the United States. And I mean, I was just talking with some brewers how some local wineries in their area help them out with equipment and everything. So it kind of go all throughout the whole entire industry when it comes to spirits in general. But
and you talk about the brewing community. The brewing community is extremely collaborative.
Yes. Yeah.
And when I first started in spirits, it wasn't always the case. I don't think you didn't hear a lot of distilleries interplaying with each other. But in the last few years, I mean, I've talked to a number of distilleries about just different ideas and sharing ideas and helping everybody get off the ground, because I think we all kind of we're in the middle of a craft distilling boom right now, so it's actually in all of our best interest to keep the craft boom going.
Exactly, because a few years back you didn't know even as an employee of the company, you're like, am I saying too much because we don't really know what we're all doing at this point.
Right.
It was such a trial and error, and which it still is obviously for a lot of people, and obviously the new ones. But you just didn't know if you could even like trust what you were doing as yourself, along with other people, probably.
The best quote I ever got was talking to Dan Carey of New Glarus Brewing Company. If you guys know who Dan Carey is, he's one of the pioneers in the craft brewing world. And I actually had the opportunity of kind of teaching him a little bit about distilling when he came to Koval. And he was sitting there, and we were all talking about the collaboration process. And he looked at me and said, none of us, we still don't know what the hell we're doing.
Right.
He's like, I've been brewing for, so many odd years, and we still don't know exactly what we're doing. And so it's best to get pieces of the puzzle from everybody.
That's a good way of putting it. Yeah, no, it's cool to see like the collaborations that honestly, I mean, distilleries and breweries are kind of getting into that, but you definitely see the community building together with distilleries, letting their guard down maybe a little bit more when it comes to talking about the future, talking about expansion, when it just is even going into new markets, simple as that. I even heard multiple distilleries talking about like what their approach is.
Right.
Even salespeople talking to each other, saying, "Hey, what bar are you going to today? So I don't go there today too."
Right,
basically,
right.
not piggyback on you and all that stuff. So it's good to see like that community definitely is building because like when you first entered the whiskey distilling industry and when Koval opened its doors, there was just like a handful in the area. Now there's like 17 or so in the Chicagoland area. You include Journeyman out here and then so many other places around us too within this kind of like tri-state region. I think when the bottles are more present, like in the big stores and the liquor stores, to see more craft bottles, more craft labels, it kind of helps everyone out. Well, at least I like to think it does in a little bit. But anything else you want to add to this?
No,
nothing at all. I've taken up way too much of your time today. So
no, it's all right.
I should end it there. It's been, been walking around Journeyman, taking photos and talking.
It's going on 3 hours now, Jake.
Going on 3 hours. That's way too long. I gotta get back to the traffic. So, that's always fun.
Oh, I don't miss Chicago traffic.